So the first thing that we're going to do in this tutorial is we're going to clone a Git repository. So I'm gonna clear this, and I'm just going to do this in my home directory. So remember this little tilde symbol. If I zoom in here, this tilde means this is my home folder on my computer, and so it should say my name or something like that. I'm going to make this repository in my terminal. I'm going to just copy and paste in the lines from the tutorial. So I've got this git clone line. What that does, this is the GitHub repository open here. You can also, if you want, you can just download a zip file or copy this URL and type git clone. It's the same URL. Git clone just brings a local version of an online Git repository onto your computer with all of the version history as well, which is really nice. You can see all the edits that have been made, but it'll just download the files in their current state. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go git clone, and this is going to download the files to the tutorial. And look, it'll tell you what the name is. It'll tell you it's doing stuff. It's unpacking it. It's great. We're going to go into it. So cd change directory. The directory itself is called hunter vegetables. We're going to go in. And this is going to be on my home folder. If you have a Mac computer, you can do this nice thing where you say open -a. You can actually open all the files at once. Sublime text. This just tells you the program you want to open all of them in, and then this means the current repository. And when I do that, it's going to open up the whole folder in my code. We don't want to worry about the scripts folder. I put that in case anyone was interested. I wrote a script that simplified some of the numbers in the old JS file, but you don't need to think about that if you don't want to. So anyway, these are the files that we're going to be using. If you want to just, if you want to open it normally, so we've made this repository in our home folder. We can go into on a Mac. It's a program called Finder. And we're finding our user home folder. So it'll be something like computer, users, and then your name. If we do that, mine is full of crap, but we can go down, search, and there should be somewhere a folder called hunter vegetables. And so we can do the same thing. We can go, we can open it with Sublime, we can open it from there. It's a very similar idea. Okay, so now let's start the tutorial. So we've got our files, and let's just have a look at the files that we have. We've got a file called main.js, which is currently empty. A file called index.html. This has got some HTML elements in it. We're going to do stuff to them in a sec. Style.css, also empty, and veg.js. This is similar to the file we had last week. It's now got some extra bits of information. It's got this like color, which we didn't have before. It's also now the numbers are just numbers rather than strings, and that's going to be useful to us in a minute. Okay, so let's go into the tutorial. So the first thing we're going to do this week is what we're really interested in is learning about jQuery. And jQuery is this really great, like quite powerful thing. It's just JavaScript. It's an extension to JavaScript. It is just more JavaScript on top of JavaScript. Basically, someone's written a bunch of functions that save you a lot of hassle if you're wanting to do stuff that interacts with the DOM, the document object model. It's been around since 2006. It is still going, which for a JavaScript framework is pretty impressive. People really like it. I use jQuery in most projects that I do. I think it's extremely useful, and for the kind of stuff we're going to do today, it's like so much easier than doing it in JavaScript. You can do everything that we're going to do today in JavaScript. Indeed, someone has done everything that we're going to do today in JavaScript because that's what jQuery is written in. But doing it in jQuery is going to make it a lot easier. So kind of the easiest way to add jQuery to your project is just by loading it as a script into your HTML page. So we're going to copy and paste this script tag. This URL here is to a content delivery network, which is just a fancy name for a lot of servers all serving the same file. So this is Google just serving a version of jQuery. You can also just download the jQuery file and include it like a regular JS file in your project. It's just JavaScript. So we're just going to add this as a tag in our HTML. So I'm going to go to index.html, and I've already put it in there. But okay, it's the thing that's right here, and I'm going to put that right at the top. So whenever any of my other scripts wants to use jQuery, that has already been read by the browser. So we're first going to do a little sanity check just to check that jQuery has been read. So I'm going to just copy and paste this. This is a nice small piece of code. This dollar symbol is the symbol of jQuery. This is like, oh, jQuery is starting now. And every time you use a piece of jQuery, that's every line, not just every file. You use this dollar sign to signal to your browser that the thing that's going to follow it is jQuery. So this is saying we will use jQuery to select the document object. This is like the same document you have in document.getElementById. This is like your DOM object, and we're going to use a method ready. Ready is a method that will trigger when the page has loaded. So this is a really nice method because what it does is it waits for everything to get onto your page and then it'll run some code. And so this is kind of a nice way to like run JavaScript and make sure it runs properly, make sure it's not like, oh, I didn't see that element because that element wasn't there. But we're just gonna put this on our code. It's just gonna print hello. So this is our main.js. So main.js is already included on index.html. That's great. And so now what we're going to do, let's just open the page in Chrome. There's other ways to do this, of course, including just finding the file and opening it in Google Chrome, but this is also, this won't work on Windows, this works on Macs, I think this works on Linux as well, index.html. You can also just type the file path into here. And so index.html, not a lot going on, but let's look at the console. It says, hello, hello. Great. Okay, so this function is working. This dollar sign is being recognized. If we don't have the dollar sign in there, if we don't have jQuery in there, if we comment that out, we refresh, it says uncaught reference error. Dollar is not defined. This is like a really common, like, oh, jQuery didn't get imported properly problem. This is just like, maybe you haven't got the thing that's linking it, maybe it's like misspelt, maybe it's being used after your JavaScript, so that's always a good thing to check. Okay, so next up, we got hello, that's great. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use jQuery to manipulate the DOM. This is the thing that jQuery is here for. So you'll notice in our HTML that we have this element called vegbox. This is the box that contains our veg. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have this little line of jQuery. We're just going to replace what is in our main.js, and we're going to, this is line. Now what this does is, so dollar is, let's use jQuery. This selects the element with the ID vegbox, and you might recognize this syntax from CSS. The hashtag, it's actually originally called an octothorpe. This like hash symbol is what is going to select the element with the ID vegbox. So this is the same as in CSS. And if I wanted to select an element with a class vegbox, I would use a dot. If I wanted to select an element with a type, say a type div, I would use div. So same difference. But I'm gonna use this ID vegbox, and when I refresh the page, so vegbox is here, right? This .html property, this is, you might recognize it from .innerHTML equals. So this is the jQuery way of writing that. It's just much shorter and much neater. So if we refresh the page, we get this text, hello vegetable. To verify, there's also the old code that we would have used before, this document.getElementById vegbox.innerHTML equals hello vegetable. If I copy and paste that in, it does exactly the same thing. So it doesn't change the operation any. It's just kind of neater and more terse. So neat. All right. Yeah. And so what's also great is that now we can use the same selectors as we do for CSS when we're using jQuery. So we're not having to like remember a set of commands like document.getElementId, document.get things by class name. It's not even element. There's a dedicated like language that we're able to just use already, which is really nice. So we can also try an iterator. So maybe if we make a couple more divs, let's just 3 divs with IDs something and something else, and our div vegbox like before. Let's just copy and paste these in. So now we have 3 divs. They still don't look like anything on the page, but they exist. Let's go back to our main.js file. So now, if we remember last week, we Yeah, let's get up last week. Class 6 for each. So we have these like for each functions, this nice inline method that exists in ES6 JavaScript. So jQuery's got something really, really similar. It's got a .each function, a .each method even, and this will operate in much the same way. It's an iterator, and what this does is it says, okay, div elements with like tag name div, that's like an HTML element type, .each, so for each of the divs on the page, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to print something, and what we're going to print is this, the element that we're currently thinking about, we're going to print its ID attribute. So if you remember, the IDs were vegbox, something, and something else. So when we go to our page, let's load it, and we'll see in our console that we've got vegbox, something, and something else. So what this has done is it's got all of the divs from the page, it's got their IDs, and then it's printed them. And this is something that's like really, like that's like one line of code. It's like really, really straightforward, really nice, really easy to do. So this is like one of those anonymous functions. So yeah, if you're struggling to remember iterators, take a look through the last class. This for each method is really, really similar to this .each method here. So nice. Okay, we can do stuff with jQuery. The other thing we can do with jQuery is add page elements. This is something we can definitely do in JavaScript as well. It's also, I find, kind of annoying in JavaScript and kind of long-winded. And so I have waited until now to introduce it as a concept. But by all means, if you want to do this in vanilla JavaScript, it's not hard. It's just it doesn't look as nice. So the first thing we're going to do is let's just get rid of our divs for now because we don't need them. We've just got a body with nothing in it. And what we're going to do in our main.js is we're going to add something to the body. We're going to append a div. And so we're going to use this method .append. So like before, this is the jQuery $symbol. Hello browser, some jQuery coming. This is get an element with the tag body. This is our body. This is a classic HTML thing. And what we're going to do is we're going to append something to it, and we're going to append a div, and the div just contains the text eating peanuts. I'm actually not eating peanuts. But let's refresh our page. So now, yeah, look at our page. We have this, but where before we had nothing, if we comment this line out, nothing is there. Nothing arrives. Add this line back in. The div eating peanuts has appeared. So what's interesting is like the div doesn't exist. Like if we make if we use style.css to go divs get a background color yellow, and we refresh the page. Okay, so this div has a background color yellow. If we just comment this line out, it's not just that we were adding an HTML, it's that we were adding a whole div. So we've managed to create an HTML element. We can manipulate the DOM, which is neat. It's really nice. And so now we can do some other stuff, because if we can manipulate the DOM in JavaScript once, we can do it lots of times. We can also do some more elaborate stuff. So the first thing we're going to try is we're just going to make a div with an ID. This is an attribute. And we're also going to make a div as a variable. So let me just copy and paste this and I'll explain it. This looks a lot more involved, but it's actually basically the same thing we had before. It's got a little bit of extra stuff. So the nice thing that jQuery allows us to do is it allows us to directly manipulate the attributes of HTML elements when we set them up. And so what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, we're creating a variable called new div, let new div. This allows us to modify it as we go along. So we're creating a new div. Now, new div just holds this like HTML element until we're ready to put it on the page. So we can do a lot of like kind of complicated stuff to this element that we're making. And then when we're ready, when it's kind of fully baked, we can append it down here. And we append it just like if you look at the line we had before, appending this div eating peanuts, we're just going to append an HTML element that we've wrapped up in this variable. But let's look at what's going on in this variable. So unlike before, we just had this string in these brackets, right? So now what we've got this div with a closing tag. This says, this is a whole div element that I'm about to give you. And so what this does is it creates like an empty div element, and then it gives it the following properties. These properties come in the form of a JSON object, because JSON is what's being used to like declare the properties of the things on the web page, just like in the DOM. But what's cool is that we now have the power to like write our own DOM JSON rather than just accessing it, which is kind of nice. And so you would use the same JSON syntax. It's these curly brackets, and right now the only property that we're setting in this is an ID. So we make a div, we've made a div, empty div, and now we're saying, okay, it has the property ID, and the ID of the div is peanuts. Next, we have this next line. We can also move this onto a new line, and the browser, which ignores new lines anyway, will just read it as like a continued thing, and we're going to do that in a minute anyway. It says .html. Do you remember that was what we did just there, where we added hello vegetable inside the div? It says the HTML is love them peanuts. I do love peanuts. Okay, so now let's refresh the page. Let's see what happens. So now, if we refresh, we've still got our background color yellow. Let's just get rid of that for now. We just got this div here. Let's inspect it. Div ID equals peanuts. That's what we did, right? We gave it an ID. We said the ID was peanuts, and said the HTML was love them peanuts. And look, it's made a div that says love them peanuts. We can also make the ID a variable, so we can say var div ID equals I don't know, potatoes, and then we can say ID is div ID. And now when we refresh the page, it's div ID potato. So we can like, what's cool about this is now we can like do everything in terms of variables. Like we can make loads of stuff that's completely generated from like a bunch of objects. We're not having to rely on like hard-coded HTML tool, or we're not like hand manipulating it. Like we're making the web page from the source. This is like really cool. You can do a lot with very little jQuery. And so we're going to do it. So this just explains kind of all of the steps that I just went through. Now, let's try and wrap it in a for each. So we're going to incorporate some of the code we learned last week, which is going to let us iterate over objects. And what we're going to do is we're going to start using that code to like help us generate a web page, like actually generate some images. So now, let me just zoom in. We've now got this for each. This is the function we used last week, which is a function of an element and an index. And we're gonna have this code, this very similar to the code we just made, which is gonna make a bunch of divs and then append them to our body. So let's just go and copy this in, and then let's have a look. So veg times is this variable that we've got in our JavaScript. That's if we just get rid of that for a second. If we console.log veg times, if we look at that printing to the console, we go to console and we can see our veg times. So this is being fetched by the JavaScript. It's really nice. So now what we can do, let's just put this function in. Okay, so what is this function doing? Well, so it's going to get each of the elements in our array, this for each function, and it's going to take each element, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a div, like we did before, called vegdiv, and we're going to give that div an ID. Now we can give the div an ID, which is a variable. So we're going to give it the variable, which is the name of the element, the name of the vegetable. And what we're also going to do is we're going to set the HTML property, this like inner text, to the element name, and then what we're going to do is append them to the body. So it's a lot of steps, but let's see what it does. So if we go and refresh our page, what we now have is each of these elements is a div. Each of these elements has an ID, which is the same as the inner text in the div, and all of these have been created in this for loop, which is kind of nice. And so let's have a go at using some more elements. So jQuery also can be used to style stuff. This is really convenient because you can also write something that basically has a similar syntax to CSS. You need to use quotation marks if you're not using variables, and you also separate things by commas. But otherwise, you're able to kind of incorporate generative CSS really smoothly in line with your JavaScript. And so it's much more easy than like doing it with like document.getElement by something .style blah 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 blah. Same syntax. And so we can do it using this line. So this CSS is going to change the background color of the div to the element color. That's this element in the array. The color is all of this list of colors. I have conveniently given them all web-friendly color names, so you can just use this straight out of the box. So now what we're going to do, just copy and paste this code over with just this extra line. Now when we refresh it, oh, what beautiful vegetable colors. And so yeah, I mean, beats aren't that accurate, but you get the idea. So you can pretty quickly do things generatively using jQuery. So one of the things that I think it's really worth you guys learning, I think that this is pretty core to a lot of like just really ordinary web design problems and web design challenges, is like having an unknown number of objects. This could be objects in an array, objects from like an API request. You've all kind of handled this problem in your own ways already. Having an unknown number of objects and wanting to display them in a consistent, responsive manner. Loads of ways you can do this. I had a whole week on this for my Parsons class, which is much more of a design class. Feel free to check it out. We're not going to go into this in depth, but I thought I would introduce the flexbox as this really common mode of making responsive websites from an unknown set of objects. Flexboxes are created by putting boxes inside of other boxes. You have an outer box and you have an inner box. It's interesting because it deals with things in one dimension at a time. So it just arranges all of your stuff in a line and then either arranges them in rows or columns. I'm just going to scroll to the end and show you this. If you get into this, I can't recommend highly enough this tutorial called Flexbox Froggy. Here he is, the frog, where you are placing a frog on a lily pad using Flexbox code, so just by writing it into the interface here. It's a great way to practice and like get some knowledge of all of the different features of Flexbox. And yeah, it's really helpful. It's really cute. It doesn't actually take you very long to do either. It's just Flexboxes are kind of rich and complicated, but not actually very hard to use. So in order to test these, we're going to make a flex container. So flexboxes are done in terms of a parent. So you have like a big box and it contains lots of little boxes. And so what we're going to do on our HTML, we're going to make this big box that's going to contain all the little boxes. So this is going to have the class flex container. And we're just going to add it in here. So our body is empty. Now we have this div class flex container here. And in our CSS, we're going to style it. So we're going to say flex container has the display property flex. Flex direction is going to be row. So we're going to order our elements in a row, not a column form. Just get rid of all of that. So now, now we have a flex container. And right now it doesn't have anything in it. We're not going to do anything. And so let's just get rid of our JavaScript. And if we go to index.html, yeah, we see nothing. We'll have a div called flex container. It doesn't have anything in it. So now what we want to do is we want to put some boxes in it. And what's cool about flex boxes is that if you put a box inside a flex container with this flex property, display flex, if you put stuff in it, they become flex boxes. You don't have to do anything special to them. So we're just going to do that. We're going to use the code we had before, but we're going to append them to this flex container. So append them to, we're going to make a veg div, not a new div, and we're going to append them to flex container here rather than body. So let's refresh the page and see what that looks like. Oh, it looks all right. It's just put everything in a box. We've still got our background color, which is nice. We've left that line in, but it's not really particularly exciting, especially because like our row is just kind of going on and on and on. It's not really what we wanted from responsiveness, so we want it to wrap around. Luckily, we can do exactly that. So we can use this flex wrap property. This means that it will wrap around in a row form. So let's do that now. So flex wrap wrap. And what this does, let's just go back to it, is it'll now, as we change the size of the page, look, this is cute, it's going to wrap our elements so they fit on the page in order, which is kind of nice. And this is kind of starting to get towards what maybe we want, which is this like responsive grid, but we can do better than this actually. And so one of the things that we might just want to do is style our elements a bit. And so just get rid of that. Let's add some new information, and let's also add some CSS. So now I'm just gonna add this into main.js. So what does this do? We're gonna add some padding to our divs, which just spaces them out a bit, and we're also gonna add in this other class. So let's go to our JS and see what that is. So this other is this like other cooking suggestion. As far as I can tell, these seem to be like the best cooking suggestions, so we're going to make the use of them. And so now what we can do, let's just leave it at that. If we refresh our page, we now have this actually fairly kind of compelling looking layout, and it's all of these boxes with things in them. If we wanted, we can make them clickable, because we're able to extract things like the ID of each element. We can make it so like each ID, when you click on it, it takes you to a recipe involving it. There's actually like a lot of stuff you can do with this right now. And so we're not going to go into that here, but what we can do, we can also style these elements as a class. And so we can actually add in a class property. You need to wrap classes in quotation marks when you declare them in jQuery. I believe it's because class is a reserved name, but I'm actually not sure. But anyway, it's kind of annoying, you just have to remember it, but what it means is we can set our class attribute in our HTML element, which is a really good thing to do. And so now, instead of having to use all of our generic CSS here, we can just keep this to the variable CSS. Now we've got a class vegetable. Let's say dot vegetable. And we had padding 30 pixels. We can do other stuff. We can say like, let's just check that works first. So yeah, it looks the same as before. We can say border 2 pix solid black. That's kind of nice, kind of ugly because you get this like middle border bit. So let's also add a margin. 3 pix. It's going to space our guys out a bit. We can do other stuff. We can set the hover properties. So we can say vegetable hover. Ooh. Let's say padding 60 pixels. So now what we get is we get these things like grow. And the row grows with them. So this is kind of nice. Like if you have like bigger elements, like your row will just stretch to accommodate them, which is kind of fun. So it makes all of the things on the page really adaptive. And you can do other stuff as well where you like make your elements stretch to fit rows, all the rest of it. Try flexbox Froggy if this seems like an appealing idea. So this is almost the end of the tutorial. The other thing I thought would be interesting to just cover quickly is, say, if we had a bunch of numerical data. And so what a pretty common thing to want to do with numerical data is to, for example, make a graph. So let's just get rid of this stuff. Let's just get rid of this, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add in this new function, but let's have a look at what it does. So let's go back to our veg.js file, and we'll see that each like item in our file, each vegetable, has like a bunch of properties that are numerical. So for example, the time taken to steam the vegetable versus the time taken to microwave it. Now, were I given two kind of graphing pursuits, I might be interested in seeing the relationship between those things. So do things that you need to steam for a long time, do they need to be microwaved? And like, how does that change according, for example, to the vegetable density? Maybe I'm like a vegetable scientist. If I wanted to make a web page that gave me a graph of that, one of the ways I could do it is by distributing this information spatially. And so that's what we're going to do here. So it's the same syntax as before. For each element in veg times, we create a vegetable div with an ID. We add the name as HTML, but then this CSS property, we have three things. Position absolute. The CSS position property, worth reading up on. I'm not going to explain it here, but essentially normally you can't position divs using the left and top. They need to have this a property absolute, fixed, or relative, which will allow you to say to the browser how you want the element to be positioned relative to other elements. Absolute is the one we're going to use here. That just means that we're allowed to position these elements in a fixed manner relative to their parent. So in this case is the body. It's quite a common one, and what we're going to do is we're going to set the left property, that's the distance of the div from the left of the web page, to be some multiple of the time it takes to steam the element, and the top property, this is the distance from the top of the web page, to be some multiple of the time it takes to microwave the element. And then we're going to append each element onto the body. So let's put it here. So this is our function. Let's refresh our web page. So now what we get is it's a graph is pushing it, but we get this arrangement of vegetables in terms of their cooking times. And what's interesting to note is that actually 0, 0, unlike most graphs where it's down here, it's actually up here. This web pages start 0, 0 at this corner. And as we go across, we can see that peppers don't really take much time at all to cook. Potatoes, pretty hefty. A whole turnip, you're going to be there for a while. Cabbage wedges, much longer to, I believe, the x-axis. The y-axis even is microwaving, so cabbage wedges much longer to microwave than they take to steam. I think that checks out. Maybe what we might want to do is, instead of having 0, 0 here, we want to move the 0 of our graph down here. Luckily, this is pretty straightforward to do. And so what we're going to do is we're going to access the document.height property. So document, our document model, our DOM, this is the thing that we've been accessing the whole time when we want to manipulate properties. It has a method height, which just gives you the height of the current viewport. So if we plug that into our code, what we can do is we can subtract the position that we want for the element. In this case, 50 times the length you need to microwave it for. We can subtract that from the height of the document. So if we do that, I'm just going to do that. So now the distance from the top is the whole distance, the whole of the page, the height of the whole of the page, minus 50 times the time it takes to microwave the element. So now it's going to go all the way down and then increment up. When we refresh it, now we see this is much like more like a traditional graph. And we can do stuff like we can add the class, vegetable, and we can do stuff like we can I don't know, make them all Helvetica. Dot font family Helvetica. So now we refresh it, changes the text. So we can still manipulate things in the same way that we were doing before. So that's it. That's it for the tutorial. See you all in class. Hope this was helpful. All right.